So there is this new controversy about protein powders and protein supplements. The National Institute of Nutrition, which is part of the Indian Council for Medical Research, has come up with a report which says don't have these protein powders and supplements, or rather reduce its usage. And I thought I would just share our BioBasics perspective on this. For us, we also recommend that we don't use these protein powders or supplements, and there's a reason and explain why. But before we do that, let's understand the problem in our understanding, right? So the problem in our understanding is, number one, that we think of food in terms of its components, like fats and carbs and proteins. The reality is food is part of nature. We are part of nature. And therefore, it's much more holistic, it's much more nuanced. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that there is very limited knowledge that we humans have figured out about nutrition. So there is this author and scientist who is called Michael Pollan, and you can check out his books. He talks about how nutrition science is as primitive today as surgery was in the 1650s. So in effect, what we are saying is that we don't understand much about nutrition yet. That's problem number two. And that is borne out by a lot of examples. For example, coconut oil was once reviled. I remember when I was growing up, was reviled as something which will cause cholesterol and therefore heart disease and all that. And today, coconut oil is being sold as a panacea for all ills around the world. Same with almonds and so many other things that the list could go on. But that is the limit. That is our limitation of our understanding of nutrition. So that's problem number two. And problem number three is that unfortunately, there is a lot of corruption in food, in the sense that there are companies who are selling products who use what we call pseudoscience to promote their products. So we have to be aware of that as well. So these are the problems of food for all of us, for all consumers. So how do we deal with this? So the solutions are like this, from my perspective. Number one, be aware and remember caveat emptor, which means that buyers have to be aware. Buyers have to be beware of all the things that is going on in the food industry. So that's number one. So use your common sense. Number two. So there, what I mean is ask questions. So for example, in this case, in the protein powders or supplements case, ask yourself whether it is a fad. Is it time tested? The best way to do it, and Michael Pollan himself says that the best way to check out whether something is a fad or whether it is time tested, you just have to ask yourself whether your grandparents or great grandparents, for some of us who are older or younger, whether they would recognize these foods. I can tell you, if I were to show my grandparents who are no more, if I were to show them the protein powders or supplements, they won't be able to even recognize it. So the question is, ask yourself whether it is time tested. If it is not time tested, don't eat it. Simple. That's solution number two. Solution number three is avoid anything that comes from a factory. So anything that comes in a paper, plastic or whatever, but which has like ingredient list, which is running into 10, 20 ingredient list. Avoid these things. What comes out of the factory is complex. What they've done to the product there is also complex. And we don't want to eat anything complex, which we don't understand. So it's best to avoid these things. So what do we have? And BioBasics recommends that we stick to raw ingredients. So be it rice or dal or oils and spices. And along with that, build a culture of cooking and eating at home. I know it's difficult to execute for most, but for most of us who are concerned about health and well-being of our family and our children, I think that's a very, very essential component of this whole food and health issue. So I think that's the third solution I would recommend. So number one, stick to basics, as I say, BioBasics. That's exactly why we call it BioBasics. And ask yourself, will our grandparents eat it? And the answer is no. So essentially, I would conclude by saying that we need to stick to the basics, ask questions, beware, go for the simple and the raw ingredients rather than the complex and things that comes out of a factory which has a long ingredient list. Avoid these things. And essentially, that's what I would do. So my answer for protein supplements is a strict no. I would not do it. So if people ask me, where do I get my protein from? Well, I say I get it from where my grandparents got it from food, from whole foods. It could be the dals, it could be the rajmas or the moong dal or the urad dals, or it could be fish, it could be milk, it could be eggs, it could be meat or mutton, whatever it is that you or your family or your culture allows you to eat or have been eating for a long time. That is where protein comes from, and that's good enough. We don't need more protein than our grandparents needed. We live a much more sedentary life. I grant that. So when it comes to carbs, yes, you can reduce the amount of carbs that you want to eat. Again, we are going into small components of the food, which I don't believe in. But if you want to understand it that way, carbs you can reduce, but why would you reduce proteins, or why would you increase proteins? What is it that we are doing much more than our parents or grandparents, which requires us to have much more proteins? It's a question for us to think. Solution to it is stick to basics, biobasics.